Said so many times earlier, we can't jump to conclusions. We don't know exactly who did this. We don't even know that it was Osama bin Laden, though the evidence seems to point more and more in that direction. But if it turns out to be him or someone else being harbored in some other place, because if you remember, there have been terrorist acts on this country that have supposedly had support from Iraq and other countries. Again, we haven't dealt with it as a national or a war-like problem. We've tried to handle it legally, said, will you extradite this person? Can we go to the world court for that person? Washington Post and other newspapers basically saying the time for that is done, and it ended yesterday morning at about 9 o'clock.
We're going to be taking a look at some of the headlines from around the country as you and I talk about what many of these editorials are calling for, swift and sure terror in America. The headline on the Detroit Free Press with those astonishing, horrific pictures. A new day of infamy, the headline of the San Antonio Express News. Again, the same horrible pictures, attack on America. The headline in the Tulsa World newspaper. Derek, are other newspapers also calling for, in such strong words as Washington Post?
Interestingly, the Los Angeles Times was a little bit more measured in its tone, seeming to basically say we have to make sure we know who this is, and that it is up to President Bush to sort of, I guess, make his presidency based on this. One question in the editorial, will he prove to be a Jimmy Carter whose presidency was poisoned by his inability to solve the Iranian hostage crisis, or will he enhance his reputation as Ronald Reagan did after the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger and as Bill Clinton did after the Oklahoma City bombing? So much of our conversation over the last several weeks has been about budgets and lockboxes and that kind of thing. That is pushed to the side now as we concentrate on this immense disaster and what the president does as the leader of this country to sort of rally the country around. I would also note that, as we heard from Gary Langer, basically I think you see public support for just about anything that the president is prepared to do.
This is going to be, for this new president, an enormous test. I mean, no other president has been thus tested this early in his administration.
You know, it's interesting. People are comparing this to Pearl Harbor. Again, on the opinion pages, one of the main points that has been made is when Pearl Harbor came, we knew exactly who it was. This time we have just as much tragedy, but not nearly as much clarity in terms of where this came from and who did it. Finding out who did it will require a lot of patience from the American people. I think that if you talk to folks, there is a sense of rage, a sense of violation, and that's the kind of thing that may lead people to want to do rash acts, but patience and knowledge, I think, is key here.
And that is sort of the cautionary words we have to raise once again, even as we do begin to get the first report that these 5 Arab men may be suspects. We have to stress the word may.
Right.
We really don't know who is responsible, and the last thing I think anybody, especially officials, want to do is to spur some sort of vigilante revenge or any sort of acts of revenge that people might take into their own hands. It is a time for deliberation in finding out who did this.
Well, as many have said before us, you can't blame communities for the actions of individuals. On the other hand, if countries are harboring these individuals, when you attack a whole country, you know there will be collateral damage. As we heard from Lawrence Eagleberger,
right.
We've got to be prepared or to make a decision as to how prepared we are to accept that, to take that.
All right, Derek McGinty, stand by for just one moment. We've been talking, of course, about those 3 commercial airplanes that were hijacked, 2 of them hitting the World Trade Center towers, a 3rd hitting the Pentagon. A 4th plane was also hijacked, we believe possibly headed for Camp David, but it crashed yesterday instead just outside Pittsburgh, killing all 45 people on board. One of those passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 was Mark Bingham, and he was able to call his mother from the airplane on his cell phone. Bingham's mother, Alice Hoagland, spoke with ABC's Peter Jennings a short while ago.
I got on the phone, Mark, and he said, "Hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham." It would be his last name. And he said, "I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the airphone of the airplane."
In his seat.
I presume so. He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, "Well, who are they, Mark?" And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, "I don't know who they are." He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said, "It's something to the effect of, it's true," and then the fire.
terrible remarks from the mother of one of the victims on board those flights, those commercial jets that were hijacked early yesterday morning. We're going to go now to ABC's Bill Blakemore, who is near Ground Zero down near Lower Manhattan, where there is this massive effort underway to get near the wreckage, the rubble, to unearth the victims. Bill, any update you can give us?
Well, they're still working down there with the search and rescue operation. The smoke seems to be slightly less than it was before, but that smoke coming out from the base of the trade towers. It's getting chillier here at night, but the crews are still going down in there covered with ash, covered with a great deal of dust and soot. There's a lot of heavy machinery down around the edges of the trade towers, what's left of them, moving bits of debris out of the way, but we've had no further word of anybody being found in the rubble. And although we have seen many cases, of course, in earthquake collapsed buildings where they find people alive even weeks after, there's not a great expectation that there will be many such cases here, because when those two towers collapsed in upon themselves, they seem to have almost completely disintegrated in the enormous heat, and the heat went out throughout the day in that area. There still could be, however, people found, and there's always hope.
You were talking earlier, Bill, that there was still concern that some of the buildings near the perimeter of this disaster area might be unstable. And in addition, there are fires still burning that are hampering rescue efforts. How is all that going?
Well, that's part of the big problem, is the fact that they still have firefighting operations as well right next to places that they are trying to rescue people. So it's two different kinds of operations all at once. And the fact that a couple of the buildings are still unstable means that they're having to assess bit by bit just exactly where they can take the sniffer dog teams and where they can send people in to try to look for pockets where people might be trapped.
As we talk to you, Bill, we're taking yet another look at this videotape that just came into our newsroom from a home video camera of the first airplane crashing into that tower. We had reports after this. Again, what a horrific scene. We had reports after, as the fire spread in the two twin towers, that people were leaping out of top floors, many of them from the 80th floor. Eyewitness reports that different victims were actually, one man and a woman held hands as they jumped, we presume to escape the flames, knowing full well that it was a choice of leaping to your death as opposed to burning.
Yes, indeed. I talked to some people when I got down here just after that was happening, describing it to me, and they were completely broken up and sobbing as they were telling me about the fact that they had to stand here and watch people leap out of this building at such a great height, because they clearly knew that they were watching people, knowing that they were leaping to their death without wanting to have to do that. Apparently the heat is driving them out of the building.
Absolutely horrific. And all day and all night over Manhattan, a huge cloud of dust and smoke. You mentioned that is beginning to clear?
Just a little bit. There's still a very high cloud of smoke just over to the left of me here. That's over to the west, because there's one large building on fire, and it's been on fire since early morning, since the trade tower collapsed right next to it.
All right. All right. So, go ahead. Finish.
Well, I was just going to say, so the fire is still not completely out. It's not as bad as it was about 3 hours ago when we had great billows of smoke here. You can still see down at the end of the street, perhaps, that there's one area where there's still a lot of smoke coming out, however, and so they just haven't solved that problem yet.
All right. Bill Blakemore, stand by. We'll be checking back with you in just a few moments. This is obviously tremendously upsetting, not just to the people who witnessed this terrible tragedy, to those people who are impacted in some way, and I think we all are to some extent, but for children as well, this can be a tremendously difficult thing. Now, aside from those 4 jets, had a close call yesterday. The pilot of TWA flight number 3 bound from New York City to St. Louis came perilously close to one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. ABC's Dean Reynolds reports the TWA pilot was told to take evasive action.
You dodged one of the aircraft that hit the tower? Well, he was up there whenever we were coming from New York, so what we had to do was, they were not talking to him, and he was changing his heading and his altitude, so they just cleared us to deviate however we had to stay away from him.
It was right after they had taken off, and the passengers were horrified.
I thought we were going to crash. I thought the plane was going to crash, because when we took off, the plane kind of went down and came back up, it was kind of shaking. and it wasn't your normal taking off routine. And then you can just see like the plane just kind of just bypassed us really close. And I said maybe it was just a mere miss.
We had him in sight, so it was a nice day in New York. We were out of the clouds, which helped a lot. So we just, dodged him.
As the TWA jet ascended, others aboard said they could see a terrible sight below.
Then when we got really high up, our brother's a fireman, and so I said, doesn't it look like the Trade Center's on fire? And he says, yeah, it does. It looks like a big fire.
All right, that was ABC's Dean Reynolds with that report. Obviously, the World Trade Center was on fire in a devastating way.
The Israeli government declared a day of mourning. They began collecting blood to send to American victims. At one center in Jerusalem, a doctor said 150 donors showed up there in 2 hours. But in East Jerusalem, celebrations from the Palestinians and Palestinian camps. They say they are very unhappy with the U.S. sighting in Israel, and some say this is what the U.S. Deserves.
Indeed, even as PLO Chief Yasser Arafat condemns the attack, we saw videotape yesterday of Palestinian men and young boys, actually, cheering and elated by the attack.
That's right, but there is one commentator from the Mideast who said that many Palestinians, the people in the streets, are not really that many when you count all the Palestinians. Many of them are on their knees praying right now that it doesn't turn out that they or any of their people had anything to do with this attack.
It was interesting listening to Prime Minister John Major give his remarks yesterday evening, and he was talking about how an attack on one democratic free country is an attack on all democratic free countries, and in essence, it's a show of solidarity with the United States in this terrible hour.
It is, and that's been the response from many different countries, many of our allies. In fact, in London this morning, this is the picture that is probably on every newspaper in the United States and all over the world. But the headline on this is the day that changed the world. So many talk about war with the United States or something, but this one particularly says that this is something that is affecting not just the United States, but the entire world.
All right, Nathan Thomas, thank you so much for that report. And indeed, it is a day that looks like it will have changed the entire world. As yesterday's horrific events unfolded, it was difficult to keep track of exactly what was happening and where. Down to ground zero here in New York City after getting that report on the status of things in Washington, D.C. Obviously, it is a horrific scene in Lower Manhattan. The streets there, down near beneath 14th Street, you can see there eerie, shrouded still in the ever-present smoke and dust that has been hanging over this entire city since yesterday morning. You can see the remnants of steel girders of buildings. The rescue crews have been working throughout the night in backbreaking, difficult, and often dangerous work, going through that rubble and that wreckage, gingerly trying to peel back the pieces of boulders, that sort of thing, of walls of buildings that have come down to see if there's anybody that they can rescue underneath. You can see there they've amassed a huge number of fire trucks, backhoes, all sorts of equipment that they need to help, frankly, get this wreckage out of there, find out who's beneath the rubble, get some handle on what the death count is, what the injury count is, and perhaps find evidence somewhere on who might be behind this devastating terrorist attack. Where are we going now? We're going to go for more reaction from a stunned nation. We have a report from ABC's Aaron Hayes.
Suicide bombers, read all about it.
There is rippling across this country.
Suicide bombers, suicide bombers.
Great fear tonight. This attack was on every American.
I can't believe it. And it's so sad that it's come to this.
The first thing I thought of this morning when I saw that was Hiroshima, Pearl Harbor, all over again. The horror of it. And thinking that we're headed for World War III.
My family right now, that's what I want to do, get close to my kids.
We were seeing things we have never seen before, not just on our TV sets, but signs all around that this is as serious as it gets. At the airports is where it was most obvious, the national confusion.
I'm really scared. I feel helpless.
Paralysis.
All the lines on the cell phones are all busy.
Planes making their way to the first airport in sight. Unloaded passengers stunned to find themselves in places they had no plans to be, unsure what to do.
I'm totally shook